afterwards, which was a system which was unsustainable. So there are various options. You give one side absolute victory, or you could have given the Serbs absolute victory, and Bosnia would have remained part of Yugoslavia, maybe seceding later like Montenegro did. The perception at the time was that Bosnian Serbs were responsible for the most egregious brutality. That course wasn't followed. If you'd given the Bosniaks overwhelming military victory, I think you would have had a flood of Serb and Croat refugees out of the country. It was a very difficult situation. No obvious answers, but we got involved, and we were real players in the Bosnian War, the international community, and now we're reaping what we sowed. So don't get involved in these things unless you've got a clear long-term strategy. It's exceptionally difficult. Another theory is that we could have focused on economic growth, but that's very difficult. Nobody really manages to do that in the context of state building. It's remained elusive in the context of rampant corruption in Bosnia. The same is true in Kosovo. The same is true in Afghanistan. To the extent there's been any economic growth in Iraq, it's been driven by the locals on the back of selling oil, which Saddam Hussein had great difficulty selling in the context of the long sanctions against him in the 1990s. It's not clear that parachuting in diplomats, lawyers and economists actually makes a real difference to the economic success of a country. You can't tweak the rules and create economic growth out of nowhere. If there's no political traction, if you've got elite capture of the institutions, it's impossible to do that. And then another view is that you allow the system to develop organically. You put the Dayton-Peter Court in place, and then you really walk away. And that's probably where I come out as what would have been the best solution. Rather than the approach of putting in an international dictator, a pro-consul, for me it's continuing a long tradition of foreigners meddling in Bosnian politics. This is what the Ottomans, the Austro-Hungarians, and the Yugoslavians, and then the communists all did in various different periods. They all ran Bosnia as part of their empire. This is one of the reasons why democratic politics in post-war Bosnia is so stunted, because there is no tradition of it. But it doesn't seem to me that you help democratic traditions flourish by keeping on making the old imperial mistakes. And let's face it, the European Union, because the Americans are quite tired of the Balkans now. The European Union, as we're seeing in Kosovo, is neither really institutionally equipped nor philosophically predisposed to run colonies. It doesn't go with the modern European Union governance experience, which is shaped by a reaction to the horrors of the Second World War, an emphasis upon democracy and organic growth. And they're not proving very good at running Kosovo, and they didn't prove at all good at running Bosnia. The Americans have proven that they are prepared to act as international dictators and to run places as colonies, but they're not prepared to do it for long enough. L. Paul Bremer, the pro-consul in Iraq, barely lasted for a year. American interest in Bosnia lasted, well, really only until Bill Clinton left office at the end of 2000, beginning of 2001. Lasted about 4 or 5 years. The Americans don't have long-term commitment because there's no financial interest for them in this country. The European Union is no good at it. So then what we end up with is a few rather negative conclusions, which is that I think Bosnia teaches us that federalism and diffusion of power amongst competing interests is not always a very neat solution to ethnic civil wars. And if the federal system fails because no one group is sufficiently powerful to hold the country together, then ethnic cooperation proves that it can never really be more than temporary. And then even then based on strict national interests. So then you have two possible courses after you've ended a civil war. One is what I call the Sudanese solution, which is that the country gradually dissolves, and there you see federalism and state building as delaying tactics to render the inevitable more politically palatable. And that's what the 6-year delay before the secession of South Sudan is about. And maybe that's what state building in post-war Bosnia was about. It was about getting everybody used to the new situation, trying to make the war a memory, and then the new chapter of Bosnia's dissolution opens. Maybe the same is true in Kosovo, and we prepare ourselves for the partition of Kosovo. And the other solution is long-term international intervention to hold a country together, where there is otherwise no natural dynamic for it to do so. Well, I'm English, and the British history has a long record of trying to do things like this. It is colonialism. It requires an extraordinary long-term perspective to achieve it, and it also requires a real financial interest. The minute the British colonies stopped making money for the British Empire, we began to decolonise. There's no money in Bosnia, no money in Kosovo. Maybe there's some money in Iraq, but there's no money in Afghanistan. Ask yourself whether state building is really consistent with the 4 to 5 year political cycles to which Western governments work. And multi-ethnicity in government is certainly a laudable ideal, I suggest, but one born of very particular experiences in Western Europe and in the United States. And it's very difficult to make it adhere as a philosophy in countries lacking traditions of democracy and competition between political interests, and it proves itself very hard to implement. And in those circumstances, trying to build institutional quality, rule of law, this is what state building is about, it may be wasted. And unless you're prepared to attempt colonial intervention, there may actually be no point even trying to start these institutions. And with that rather pessimistic note about what we're trying to do when we talk about state building, I suggest that there are a few sobering lessons in the Bosnian experience for the various state building projects elsewhere around the world. Thank you very much for your time.